Well, one of the things when you're talking about degrading society, I mean, we're seeing right now all of the outcry of the numbers of women that have been sexually harassed or victimized. When you know that at least 1 out of every 6 American women has been a victim of either rape or attempted rape, and it may even be higher than that because not all of them report. So, I mean, this is a rampant epidemic problem, the sexualization of our society. And so that's, you know, what do you have? 17.7 million American women that have been victims of rape. I mean, this is a huge problem. And men feeling the freedom to be able to treat women as sexual objects.
This is Terry Beatley, your host of What If We've Been Wrong? I'm shining light into some dark places so that beauty, goodness, and truth defeat the schemes of the enemy. It's true, people are perishing for lack of knowledge, and we're instructed to have nothing to do with the evil deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That's what I do on What If We've Been Wrong? Rethink, explore, and uncover some hidden truths so that more people can experience an abundant life and the joy of being set free from the shackles that hold us in prison. Welcome to What If We've Been Wrong? Today I'm talking about true feminism and identifying the real threats against women, and it's not what you're thinking. Right now I'm going to list for you the top 10 to 12 reasons why the founder of Planned Parenthood should be and can be blamed for the denigration of women in American culture today, and what we can do to reverse the damage and restore American culture of family and life and not recreational sex. The founder of Planned Parenthood was Margaret Sanger, and she originally began her dirty deeds back in the early 1900s under an organization called the American Birth Control League. Today we call that Planned Parenthood, and it has received tens of millions and millions and millions of dollars. Actually, we're probably up into the billions since the early 1950s. Margaret Sanger, though, she can be blamed, in my opinion, for the denigration of women in American culture today. Margaret Sanger is blamed for motherhood, meaning being with child, and how it's looked at now as a disease that needs fixing. Margaret Sanger can be blamed for blaming women and motherhood for the world's problems. Margaret Sanger can be blamed for the increase in infidelity and the decrease in morality. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, is blamed for selling promiscuity as a government-funded right. She's blamed for more children being born out of wedlock. Margaret Sanger is blamed for more women living in poverty and more fatherless children. Margaret Sanger should be blamed for more crime because of the rampant poverty. And Margaret Sanger can be blamed for more black children dying in their mother's wombs due to abortion. And the numbers of those black children being killed in their mother's womb is more than all accidents, injuries, homicides, and all diseases added up together. Margaret Sanger can be blamed for more women being looked at as just mere sex objects. And the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, can be blamed for the government's long encroaching arm into taking control of our health care. Well, today, my guest is Cynthia Dunbar. She's National Committee woman for the Republican National Committee. She's a former law professor, and she's a candidate for Congress in a Virginia district. Cynthia, welcome to What If We've Been Wrong?
Thank you, Terry. It's great to be here with you.
Well, we're going to have some fun on this show today. My guest, Cynthia, wrote an article back in 2013, and it's titled True Feminism, Identifying the Real Threats to Women. And like I said earlier, it's not what you're probably thinking. This is 2013. It was published in the William & Mary Journal of Women in the Law. It's a volume 20, issue 1, article 3 in 2013. And Cynthia, I'm going to read a few things from that just to sort of kick this off. You wrote this article, which is squarely in defense of women and their unalienable right to equality with men, is an expose on the dangerous and erroneous assumptions embraced by the second wave of the feminist movement. It's a declaration of the inherent value and intrinsic worth of the female populace and intends to unequivocally promote and embrace true femininity, unlike the hazardous and misleading views unwittingly expressed by the second wave of the feminist movement. Cynthia, let's start plowing through this. Can you please tell us, give us just highlights of the first wave of feminism? When was it, and what were the women standing up for?
So this is such a huge issue that we need to make sure we understand, because the difference between the first wave and the second wave is actually ideological, mutually, they can't coexist. They are actually offensive to one another. The first wave was all about women's rights. It really was about true feminism. It really was about the advocacy of women's rights, both politically, socially, economically, that we were to be deemed equal with men. And it was really started from a biblical basis. If you looked at a lot of these women who were involved in the Seneca Falls Declaration of Women's Rights, they were people like Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, these women who were very devout, and they believed in the equality of rights of all. I mean, they promoted, emancipation of the slaves. They were promoting rights of Native Americans, and they were promoting the rights of women because they believed that all were equal in the sight of God. So it really was a true, pure push for feminism in the most positive light. What happened in the second wave, totally different. And it came up with this kind of sexual revolution ideology. It was going hand in hand at the same time with Margaret Sanger and Alfred Kinsey, who was pushing the sexual revolution. And that actually was a totally different viewpoint that they were promoting. They were promoting that women were inherently less valuable than men unless we could take control of our bodies and our reproductive systems to be like men and not be bound to becoming mothers.
All right, I want to interject here. I think this is such an important part, and we're going to dig deeper into some of the women in the past. But so you're presenting the case that originally the first wave of feminism, the women were saying, look, we're equal with you men. We're equal. We should be able to vote. We have equal rights. But then when this second wave, and like I said earlier, I could probably argue that this really wasn't a wave of feminism. It was an attack on true femininity, true feminism. Yes. But for the sake of just keeping in context for how it's been framed in years past. So the second wave of feminism saying, no, the only way we can be equal with men is if we try to remove our reproductive our ability to reproduce. We have to be equalized with men by stripping ourselves of what makes us distinct, is our ability to bring forth life.
Right, and if you really think about this, what the second wave was pushing, and you're absolutely right, it's not really a true push of feminism, because what it was really a misogynistic, anti-feminine argument. It was saying that women in our current state, in our current biological state, that we were and are inherently less than men. We had less value, and the only way we could become equal with men is if we were able to take control of our reproductive biological organs, and that to where we were free from the bondage of procreation.
So it's actually just the opposite. It's the opposite of what the true feminist stood for.
Absolutely. It is absolutely hostile to the first wave of feminism. And that's why people like, Catherine Booth, who was a big feminist, she and her husband started the Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. Very, very proactive woman. And she talks about, how women, I think there was a quote in the article that there seems to be a great deal of unnecessary fear of women occupying any position which involves publicity. She talks about women should be able to be ambitious just as a man and do whatever they wanted to do, and that they wouldn't be throwing off their femininity to do so. So she really was a pure feminist. She believed in complete equality of women in our inherent state. And so the second wave is absolutely hostile to that.
Well, I picked up one of your quotes that from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Her position on the biological makeup of women was one of glorification rather than vilification. The quote is from Elizabeth Stanton: "We are, as a sex, infinitely superior to men, and if we were free and developed and healthy in body and mind, as we should be under natural conditions, our motherhood would be our glory. That function gives women such wisdom and power as no male can possess." And look at where we've come. Look at where we've come.
Yes.
So the women of yesteryear in the feminist movement, these were women of faith, of Christian faith, were they not?
Absolutely. And that's why I think, we shouldn't step away from being called feminist. As Christian women, we are feminists because we do believe in the value that women inherently possess. The problem is feminism is now a word that has been co-opted by the left and by the progressives to be tantamount to the more misogynistic viewpoint we've talked about, that we are bound to our biological bodies and we need to be free from that. So, yes, absolutely. This was based on biblical viewpoints that in God there is neither male nor female, and so the value was absolutely the same.
Mm-hmm. And how about, let's see, Sojourner Truth. Boy, you had some interesting quotes of her. I highlighted here. "Her passion for the inherent value of each individual solidifies the connection between emancipation and women's rights." What can our listeners gather from you about Sojourner Truth and what she stood for? And what does this have to do, what the connection between slavery, emancipation, and the women's feminist movement?
Well, there are so many lines that traverse between all of these pro-activists at the time. Like I said, the Quaker movement, which was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. Sojourner Truth was a very devout woman of God and a former slave. And so she spoke about both issues. She talked about how, she was a woman and, also that having been a former slave, that she was not defined or limited by either of those things, but she had the same inherent value and worth as any other individual. So, and also the Quakers many times pushed forward issues where they were talking about Native Americans, and they had lots of political ideologies that they were pushing way ahead of their time, mainly because they truly were devout and they believed in the inherent value of people because of being created in the image of God. So Sojourner Truth was a very outspoken activist. She had a lot of great speeches, and having come out of slavery and also speaking for women's rights at the same time, a lot of times you saw the same people doing both because it was really birthed on a biblical understanding of the value of humanity.
That's right. And in light of where we are today as a nation where Christianity is so under attack, I believe as a woman of faith, we are to stand up, be bold. I mean, there's nothing that should be holding us back to be able to proclaim the biblical heritage of feminism. I mean, look at where feminism is today now, where they're trying to convince women that there is no difference between man and woman. So, but you have to look like a man, you have to act like a man, you have to be like a man in order to be able to advance going forward. And I think so much of this stems back to the roots of Margaret Sanger, who, like I said earlier, she began her dirty deeds back in the early 1900s under the American Birth Control League. Tell us a little bit about what you discovered with your study of Margaret Sanger and how she really undermined the role of women.
Well, I mean, if you read some of her quotes, if you understand her vilification, I mean, she called women the creators of overpopulation. She talked about, having children as wringing their hands over each fresh horror. She talked about those that were populating the prisons and the insane asylums, as though any form of procreation or bringing a child into this world was an absolute terror. I mean, if that is your viewpoint of femininity, if that is your viewpoint of being a woman, obviously it is not a healthy, positive viewpoint. And so when you birth an entire movement off of that type of disdain for femininity, clearly it's going to go down a bad path. And, I'm just shocked that no one has ever gone back to really dig this out. I mean, there are people who have, but it needs to be brought to the surface, because the very foundation of the second wave, which, like you pointed out, it's kind of an oxymoron, is so flawed that there's no woman on the face of the earth that should want to embrace that.
Absolutely. And I love the way you frame this. Margaret Sanger was diametrically opposed, if not even hostile, to the glorification of motherhood that was interwoven into first wave feminism. There's a great book called Grand Illusion, The Legacy of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, written by George Grant. I recommend everybody read that book, Grand Illusion. It really set me on my course, because when I read that, I had to reread it about 5 or 6 times, because I thought, if America and American women could find out what's inside this book and to really understand the legacy, if you read that book, if you read Subverted, and then you read my book, What If We've Been Wrong, those 3 books, Grand Illusion, Subverted, and What If We've Been Wrong, you've got the whole back history of why America looks the way it looks today with all this rampant promiscuity, all of these babies being born out of wedlock, and all these babies being aborted every single year. It goes back to Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger, I mean, I know you know this, Cynthia, she was an atheist. She hated the church. She particularly despised the Catholic Church, but she hated Christianity as a whole. And then ultimately what she ended up doing was using pastors years ago, just like she's still using many of them today, to advance what I call her gospel of birth control and rampant, unadulterated promiscuity. And so my charges against Margaret Sanger at the beginning of this segment, where we can trace back so much of the poverty right back to the gospel of Margaret Sanger, that she told women, she recommended to women, have all the sex you want, have it out of wedlock. She recommended in her first pamphlet, the Birth Control Review, that she wanted women to go to hell look in your eyes, have all the sex you want. She hated marriage. She hated the marriage bed. And so, folks, we have poured billions of dollars into Planned Parenthood, and it is time to awaken. I want you to keep it right where you're at. What If We've Been Wrong on America Out Loud. We're going to be coming back and talking more with Cynthia Dunbar about what's getting ready to happen if we cannot awaken as women. And that's reaching millennials. Millennials, Planned Parenthood is after you. They're after you and your babies. They're after you and your worldview. I mean, if you treasure purity at all, if you treasure sexual health, Planned Parenthood is not the healthcare organization that you might be thinking it is. Planned Parenthood has the worldview of spreading global promiscuity as well as population control. We'll be right back with Cynthia Dunbar.
The Out Loud perspective awaits you in life, love, politics, a healthy lifestyle, your faith, personal development, and living an out loud life on AmericaOutloud.com. Well, it's your news and entertainment network where you can listen 24/7 on our free apps on both Android and Apple. Welcome to the new era in communications, America Out Loud Talk Radio.
Think back to the last time you felt healthy and energized. The best times of our lives occur when we're at the peak of our health, sleeping better, full of energy and focus. We know that fades with age, and you might be feeling the effects of aging as low energy and poor sleep. But it doesn't have to be that way. There haven't been any nutrition systems designed to rejuvenate our bodies as we get older until now. Healthy Cell Pro is the only multi-nutrient system that impacts the building block of your body, the cell. Created by anti-aging expert and Nobel Prize nominee, Dr. Vincent Giampapa. Award-winning Healthy Cell Pro cuts through the complexity of nutrition supplements by simply giving you the purest ingredients, filling dietary gaps to nourish your cells and enhance your quality of life for optimal performance. Visit healthycell.com and use code OUTLOUD for an exclusive discount, or call 844-869-9958.
You're back with Terry Beatley and Cynthia Dunbar on What If We've Been Wrong. Cynthia, in this next segment, we want to dig a little bit deeper into the second wave of what's called the second wave of feminism, and just take a look at some of the damage that's been done. One of the first and most apparent things is this idea of advancing women and women's reproductive rights and all this. Well, about 60 million babies have been destroyed through legalized abortion. But let's face it, Cynthia, half of those, we're talking about over 30 million little baby girls have lost their lives. How can they justify this? And how do they take cover and not addressing that these are little baby women that they would have grown up to be more women in this big feminism wave? Why are they killing off these babies?
Well, and actually, the data shows that the percentage is even higher for female babies being aborted than male, because there are times when the aborted babies are actually done based on their biological sex. So it's clearly not a greater protection of women or females. It's actually put us in a larger place of harm's way. And not only that, we've seen that and these may be older statistics, but I believe even in 2008 that they show between 700,000 to 2 million women and children are trafficked globally each year. And of course, predominantly most of those are female. And so if we're having this huge rampant global problem, there's not a valuing for women. And we see that even within North America. I think it was, there's about almost 0.9% of the global number of human trafficking actually comes from North America. So these problems are not going away. They're increasing. And I think it's because women, when we brought on that whole sexual revolution issue, where we now are viewed many times more often as objects than even prior to the second wave of feminism, it actually decreases our rights, and we're not making headway in the areas where we were with the first wave, like when we were pushing women's suffrage and different issues that actually were of concern and benefit to women.
That's right, and it's as early as 1930 or 1931 in the Washington Post newspaper, and I wish I'd pulled this quote up earlier, so I'm just going to paraphrase, but it was coming from, it was an op-ed, and it was warning that if America does what Margaret Sanger was promoting, pushing this whole, contraception mentality and all this, sterilization, the Washington Post warned that it would sound the death knell of marriage. And that's exactly what's happened, because her brand, she wanted rampant, she believed in sexual hedonism. And that's exactly what we're living in today. And I believe we can only take so much of it before, we basically vomit it back up, because it's just, we can only take but so much. You can only degrade a culture, a society so much, and women.
Well, one of the things when you're talking about degrading society, we're seeing right now all of the outcry of the numbers of women that have been sexually harassed or victimized. When you know that at least 1 out of every 6 American women has been a victim of either rape or attempted rape, and it may even be higher than that because not all of them report. So, this is a rampant epidemic problem, the sexualization of our society. And so that's, what do you have? 17.7 million American women that have been victims of rape. This is a huge problem. and men feeling the freedom to be able to treat women as sexual objects. And a lot of this goes back to the feet of the concurrent push by Margaret Sanger and Alfred Kinsey, who was also pushing the sexual revolution. And this has also fed into our schools. I mean, I dealt a lot with textbook curriculum issues when I was on the Texas State Board of Education. And you see the push for sex education within our schools, for the normalization of aberrant behavior within our children. And all of these textbooks ultimately go back to Kinsey, and he and Sanger both had adopted this very this sexual revolution ideology that was being foisted upon our society as a whole, and our culture has now bought into it, and we are seeing the fruit and the problems from that.
Well, the problem with Alfred Kinsey, he believed children were sexual from birth. And so then and a lot of his followers, they broke off and they formed what's called SEICUS, S-E-I-C-U-S. Tell us a little bit about SEICUS.
Well, I know Kinsey's research was actually child pedophilia. I mean, it was abuse. And the documentation goes back to those original charts where they were doing nothing but abusing children, and they were using sex offenders and pedophiles to do the documentation. And yet it's from that data that they have then been able to document that children are supposedly, quote unquote, sexual from birth. And then that's the basis that they've used to do the sex education training.
It was SEICUS is basically the sex ed arm of the Alfred Kinsey graduates, if you will, and then between them and Planned Parenthood, they're pushing their brand of sex education into the government-run schools. So I want to kind of paint this picture. So we have this problem where the original feminists, who were all about suffrage and emancipation, and they glorified motherhood. They recognized, wait, this is what makes us distinct and unique. And then just a few years later, in comes Margaret Sanger, who's an atheist, and she believes in sexual hedonism. And so she begins spreading her gospel of sterilization and birth control, commandeers the women's movement, the feminist movement, and then we get into the late 40s and 50s, and we have Alfred Kinsey, who actually we've covered him in a different interview, but Alfred Kinsey, a sexual deviant who believes children are sexual from birth, and then his graduates, if you will, start their own sex education doctrination, which is now running rampant in our government-run schools. And yet, as voters, we keep going back to the voting booth, and nearly half of the country keeps voting for people who want to keep funding Planned Parenthood, and then even funding SEICUS. It's like, and so, Cynthia, when you think about like public policy and how it costs the taxpayers and all this mindset of rampant promiscuity that's undergirded by our tax dollars. We see that even in the state of Virginia. So I just see this circle of, okay, wait a minute, our kids now, instead of being taught purity is a good thing, they're taught that they can't control themselves. And here, let me give you a condom. Of course, they don't always work, so the girls get pregnant. So then they're forced with either having the baby out of wedlock, which then leads to which leads to poverty, or they're forced into an abortion, which then haunts them both physically and emotionally the rest of their lives. I mean, what do we do from here, Cynthia?
Well, and the thing is, when we start looking at using our tax dollars to fund ideologies that we don't support, I mean, Thomas Jefferson even said that. He goes, to compel a man to support the propagation of beliefs which he does not, which he abhors, he called it sinful and tyrannical. Well, how much of our government is spent, how much of our tax dollars that we don't really want it to go into these types of areas? I mean, when you've got Planned Parenthood, sure, if you want to do things that are really helping women's health, that's great, but we know what high percentage of the money that goes to Planned Parenthood is used for the very things we're talking about, which are damaging to women, damaging to our society. And there are other clinics out there that actually do good work, and yet the predominant lion's share of the money is going into the wrong places. Same thing with sex ed policy and with, curriculum and that. So I think a lot of what can help us is just even getting back to the mindset of shrinking government, back to what our founding fathers intended, especially at the federal level. If we can pull it back within the purview, and I know this isn't maybe the area you were wanting to go, but back into the enumerated powers that they intended for the federal government, reserving all the rest of it to the states and the people, because the closer you can get to local control where parents can actually have a say into what is going on within their schools, the more control the parents have and the better that will be. And when we have it at federal top-down, pushing all of this agenda into our school systems or through the use of money at Planned Parenthood, that becomes hugely problematic, and there's very little accountability. So we need to be attacking this from several different fronts.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of, protecting women, right now I'm thinking of Black women. Where is the justice in having a Planned Parenthood clinic, like they like to call it, a facility in a minority neighborhood? We know all the evidence is out there, and people can go watch this, by the way, about the racist history of Planned Parenthood. People go right onto YouTube and look at MAAF as in Frank A. It's a Swahili word, Maafa 21, MAAFA. It's called Black Genocide in the 21st Century. And so here we have with these Planned Parenthood facilities being placed in minority neighborhoods. We know Margaret Sanger was a complete and utter racist. She was an atheist. I mean, she wrote about it. All her board of directors were flaming racist and wrote books about it. And now we have abortion as the number one killer. But then it's not just the abortion factor. We have the Planned Parenthood education, which is promoting little girls and boys to have sex outside of marriage. And I mean, gosh, Cynthia, what is it now? 70% of all Black children are born out of wedlock. Their mothers are on the government dole and keeping them in this perpetual state of government dependence. And then you got liberal women who are saying, "Oh no, Planned Parenthood is all about protecting women." How do we connect the dots to help women understand it's not what they're being told?
Right. Well, and that's what I said. They co-opt the messaging. They co-opt the terms. They talk about how they are for women's rights and they are the feminists, when really they're very misogynistic and anti-women's rights. When you talk about what's happening within the minority community, and about 48% of conceptions within the Bronx end up in abortions, that is selective genocide. There's no way you can define it otherwise, and they're being lied to. There was a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg in an interview that she was talking about how they all knew that Roe v. Wade was to get rid of those they didn't want too many of. I mean, it was a horribly racist motivation, even behind the case of Roe v. Wade. And yet this lie is continued to be propagated, and it makes the pro-life people as being narrow-minded and not caring about women's rights, when in reality, we are the ones that saying women are being lied to. They are being used at the hands of the abortion industry and Planned Parenthood. This is being done as selective genocide within minority communities. And at what point is the truth going to be told so that we can wake up and step away from this blight on our nation?
Absolutely. And my hope and prayer is that millennials will listen to these types of interviews. Millennials are going to make up 40% of the electorate in the next presidential election. And, not only, they so many wanting socialism and all this, well, a lot of the young women have bought the lies of, the left. That it's the left that protects women's rights. And I'm hoping that we can give enough evidence, because if we don't wake up, if America doesn't wake up, the black race, they can kiss it goodbye because they're going to be aborted out of existence. If what's happening, like up in New York, where the statistics are against the baby, the black race is going to diminish over the years. Look at the sexually transmitted diseases. Thanks to Planned Parenthood, sexually transmitted diseases are rampant. And then it costs the taxpayer millions and millions of dollars in research and medical care and all this.
Well, obviously, it's unsustainable, and you put people in a bad situation. You have young people who are getting pregnant that, they're not able to sustain a household at that point. It puts them in a horrible situation. And then even just nationally, as far as funding in these areas that were not intended, you can't continue to, for lack of a better term, rob Peter to pay Paul. There's limited sums of money. And when they start talking about federal money, that is a total myth. There is no federal money. That money all comes from the taxpayers. It goes up, and what I have kind of used, Reagan, I've twisted what he used to call trickle-down economics, but it's true. If you take money up to the federal government, by the time it gets back into any community, it's pennies on the dollar. What I do find is interesting is that millennials are actually less sexually active than Gen Xers. And I think it's because what we've seen is that millennials are interested in the truth, and they're interested in solutions. They are tired of being told what's wrong, and they have more access to information. And there's been this huge fear because there's been so much sexual activity that having sex with a younger person, like a 17-year-old girl or whatever, that the likelihood of acquiring some type of disease has become so high at that level that they are now, they've been kind of, overstimulated with this type of push that it is starting to swing back. And so I'm very hopeful for that they will now be aware of the truth, that they will actually do the research you're talking about. It's not hard to find this information. The writings are out there, the speeches are out there, the quotes are out there, the data is out there. You can find it if you really want to look for it. The only problem is it's not going to be given to you by the mainstream media. The Huffington Post still does op-eds talking about, sex ed now needs to be mandatory. It shouldn't even be based on state by state. So the mainstream liberal progressive media is always going to push one way and one way only. But hopefully listening to podcasts like this and researching it themselves, they will become aware of what the truth is and how they've been lied to. America's been lied to for generations. And it's caused a major loss for us.
Well, and I call it the 100-year curse of Margaret Sanger. It began back in 1916, and I'm calling it out. It ended in 2016, because I believe with the election of Donald Trump, and if we can get the truth out there, we will ultimately see in the next few years, I hope, but it's going to take having an educated populace, the federal defunding of Planned Parenthood, because it goes beyond just the fact that they kill babies. It's the fact that they're teaching our children. I got blessed with the opportunity to homeschool my 2 children so I could teach them purity. I could teach them the value of their virginity. Well, not everybody has that opportunity. So I believe, though, if we can educate the populace about the history of Planned Parenthood, what it's really costing us, not just in souls, but also in how it's affecting our pocketbook, we can eventually get Planned Parenthood defunded, and my hope, of course, is destroyed. I believe the day is coming when America is educated about the real history of Planned Parenthood and what it's doing. We will destroy it, and we will end up looking at Planned Parenthood the same way we do at slavery. It'll become like a national. It's a scab on our history. But if we can make it go away, hopefully there'll be a culture of love, a culture of life, a culture of family, a culture of purity, and we can get back to really flourishing again. Because right now, we're suffering, and we're suffering the consequences of the gospel of Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, who's cost you dearly in billions of dollars. We'll be right back.
The goal is to deliver a message of truth, inspiration, and hope to the world, to unite people from all backgrounds and beliefs in an effort to advance humanity. News blogs, informative podcasts, and entertaining videos. It's AmericaOutloud.com, where the conversation never ends, with 24/7 streaming on our free apps on both Android and Apple. Welcome to the new era in communications, America Out Loud Talk Radio.
You're back with Terry Beatley on What If We've Been Wrong, and we're shining light in dark places. Today we're kind of digging into feminism and what it used to be, and then it got commandeered. My guest today is Cynthia Dunbar. Cynthia, I'd like to transition over to talking about politics, policy, but after I read this one quote again, because I just think it speaks volumes. This is from Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the first feminists, and she said, "We are, as a sex, infinitely superior to men, and if we were free and developed, healthy in body and mind, as we should be under natural conditions, our motherhood would be our glory. That function gives women such wisdom and power as no male can possess." I'm hoping men and women are listening to this broadcast. You know, let's face it, being pregnant today, being with child, is looked at as if you have a disease and it needs fixing. We've denigrated women down to sex objects. And there's a whole back history to this, which we've already covered, to a certain degree. But going forward, how can a lot of this be remedied through policy, politics? So let's just start with, Cynthia, as you see it, what's the problem in the political realm? We're basically in a two-party system. You got the Democrat Party, which fully embraces killing babies in the womb, and they've commandeered the feminist message of so long ago, that women are equal with men, and it has nothing to do with our reproductive body parts. It was just that women wanted, equal rights. They wanted to be able to vote, and all that's been commandeered. And then you got the Republican Party that, at least in its platform, they do stand up for pro-life position, which obviously if they stand up for a pro-life position, that's honoring women, it's honoring motherhood and parenthood and God's gift of family. But what's the problem?
Well, there's a couple of problems. One, there's a comment that policy is downstream from culture, but I've seen the converse. I've seen a lot of cultural norms adopted because of policy. People thinking, well, abortion can't be horrible and bad because our government wouldn't be approving if it were. And so a lot of times the policy sets the tone. But then the problem with it, the Republican and Democrat Party, yes, we do have a two-party system. And you've got the Democrats who are full on, they are anti-life and promoting it. And they also have the mainstream media fully behind them. So they stand up and they bastion their whole thing of, they're for women's rights, and they create the message and the narrative, which is not true. But when you have the media over and over and over repeating that message, people start to buy it. Conversely, you have on the Republican side in our platform is very pro-life. So most of the Republicans that, are going to be elected, and they know they have Republican districts, and they're going to at least give lip service to being pro-life. And they're going to have to, because most of those Republican red districts are very pro-life. But then if most of those people, unfortunately, are politicians, and at the end of the day, they're more concerned about keeping their elected office than they are actually moving the ball forward and getting something done, then when you have the liberal media constantly castigating and vilifying anything to do with the right, anything about pro-life, those quote-unquote politicians, they move away. And so they will talk a good talk about being pro-life. But you can look at their record over and over and over, sometimes, 5, 10, 15, 20, sometimes 25 years, and you look at that and you see if you're so staunchly pro-life, what have you done? How many pro-life bills have you carried? How many times have you gone to the mat like Wilberforce did to end slavery? and taking the hard hits to continuously fight for life. And very rarely will you see someone championing this over and over and over, because at the end of the day, what they're concerned about is just they want to continue to be reelected, and they want to stay out of the media, and they want to stay out of controversy.
Well, and I think they're scared to death of these of radical feminists who come after them so angrily for their right to kill babies. You know, I think so many of them just back away. They're afraid of the issue.
Yes. Absolutely, and that is why I think there's organizations, you know, the Susan B. Anthony organization, they prefer pro-life women, and it's not because they're trying to give any favor to the biological sex. It's because it makes it easier for women, pro-life women, to message about pro-life, because they try to say this is about men wanting to deny women's rights. So when you have a very strong, articulate pro-life woman who can stand up and say, look, this is not about denying women's rights. I am completely a feminist, and I believe in the equality of women to men. But this is about women being lied to. This is about women being used to advance the abortion industry. And they are in a much better place to message that. But I also think that whether it's a man or a woman, at the end of the day, you have to have people who are going to be willing to take the hard hits no matter what. And unfortunately, a lot of our politicians really don't have the intestinal fortitude to do what is necessary in order to end abortion in our society today.
And the cost of, and I know, you know, we've talked about feminism broadly, but at the end of the day, this whole movement got commandeered by Margaret Sanger, by the sexual, you know, her beliefs of sexual hedonism. Then this third wave of feminism came around, and actually, have we even delved into that very much yet? The whole third wave of feminism, which let's address that right now. As far as what position has that left women in with this third wave?
Well, it's actually further, just like the second wave came against true feminism, the third wave has further diluted it. I mean, when you talk about gender is now a construct. Okay, so that means any biological male can determine that he is a female. So we've seen problems with this. And, you know, like in athletic competitions where men are now going to be in competition with women because they self-identify as a woman. And so the third wave says, well, yeah, we're going to support that because gender is a construct. But you can see by doing that, that further waters down and dilutes truly promoting any rights of women, protecting the biological sex of women, making sure that we have equality in every part of life. Once you make gender a construct, that actually swipes at that right instead of building it up.
And I'm looking for it right now. Here it is. In the first page of your article that you wrote, True Feminism, Identifying the Real Threats to Women, and I have it highlighted, you say, it's an undeniable fact that women are inherently distinguishable from men in many ways, the most obvious being their reproductive organs. And you have that footnoted that comes from what is biological sex? Oh, that comes from Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood acknowledges that our, quote, our biological sex is how we are defined as female, male, or intersex.
If you in any way try to poke a hole in the logic of their argument, they will simply start yelling and screaming and saying that you are a homophobe and that you're a xenophobe and you're, you know, whatever else they want to throw out. And so it has nothing to do with logic.
Well, wait a minute. What did Hillary Clinton call? Oh, no. Oh, the end result were deplorables.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
So, you know, I just think of we're living in a society where millions of people have been so hurt emotionally and physically by the tsunami of secular humanism, you know, which has washed over our country, which is really at the root of, you know, radical feminism. Like I said, I do not believe the second and third waves of feminism are have anything to do with feminism. They are attacks on true feminism. Because I'm here to say, as a mother of 2 children, yeah, it's a beautiful thing, motherhood. Motherhood is it's just like it said in the article, it's the fulfillment, and it's what distinctly sets us apart from men. And even women who choose not to have children, maybe they never get married, maybe for whatever the reasons they don't choose to have children, they still have that unique gift, and it's a beautiful thing, and we shouldn't strip it down and pretend it's a disease. And so right. I do want to recommend a book called Subverted. Subverted is, it specifically gives the back history of how the sexual revolution commandeered the women's rights movement. It's an amazing read, and when somebody reads, if they read Grand Illusion, Subverted, and then What If We've Been Wrong, they've got the whole back history. So if you were elected Congresswoman for District 6 in Virginia, yes, what would be some of the ongoing, well, not so much the education, but the policies that you would want to put forth that truly help women, help families, help motherhood? What would you want to see?
Well, I would, first of all, love to see the funding of Planned Parenthood completely ended. I do believe that if we can start going back to the constitutionally limited powers of the federal government, that would help tremendously. And I think that, one of the things I've talked about was sponsoring the heartbeat bill. Obviously, if we can only get pain capable through, that I support that, but I would like to go full on and try to get the heartbeat bill and something substantive done. I also would like to verify the authority of the Congress to impeach justices. I think if we promote one impeachment process where we have judges who, unconstitutionally write law, then what that will do is put the balance of power back in Article 1, Congress, over Article 3, which we've seen the judiciary run amok, and Roe v. Wade and other cases like that have caused bad precedents. And we need to go and take that authority back into place. The list goes on and on, right, as far as, education. So there's a lot of things that could be done if someone were willing to do it.
Right. I remember hearing a story in Virginia. A woman was raped back in college. She's white. She was raped by a black man. She did not believe in abortion. She brought that baby into the world, got the baby baptized, and said goodbye. Provided a life through adoption, and life went on. And about 25 years later, that daughter found her mother via Facebook, and fast-tracking the story, they ended up getting connected. The mother and her now husband went up, so now the girl's like 25, 26 years old. She had 3 children. So now this family has grown by a daughter, the son-in-law, and 3 children. Well, the daughter, who had been conceived in rape, said, "Mom, just hold on, I want to show you something." She ran upstairs, got something really special, came back downstairs, and it was the little white dress that her mother had her baptized, christened in when she arrived into this world. And so it just makes for this beautiful love story that this is, something so ugly, so horrible. So this is what radical feminism, the sexual revolution, how it's commandeered true feminism. It's stripping us of some of these beautiful God stories that can happen. But we don't even give God a chance. We're trying to take everything into our own hands, and then we've fallen for the lies. It's true, because in John 10:10, the word says the evil one comes to steal, deceive, and destroy. And that's exactly what's happened. So we had real feminism, right, back in the 1800s, and they were standing up for truth, standing up for, the right to vote, the right to be counted as equal. And then it got commandeered. We just have a little bit of time left. What are some of your parting thoughts, Cynthia, as far as what young women, how could we help young women who perhaps don't have all the truth yet, maybe resources, or what would you encourage young women to do so they don't fall into the trap of radical feminism?
Well, I think, not only young women, but young men, basically every person in the whole world, if we could know our value and know who we are in the Lord, if we could know that anything that promotes division and hatred, so whether it's hatred of your own body, hatred of another group of people, it was like I was saying, the liberal progressives always push for division, whether they're trying to say, well, you're a xenophobe or you're a racist or you're whatever. I mean, they're pushing for division, and God pushes for unity, to value yourself, to value others, to move away from the bitterness and the anger and the division, and to come alongside, like the first wave feminists did, where they not only valued who they were as an individual, as a woman, as the fact that they could bring a beautiful, precious life into this world, but they valued others and were willing to fight for them. I mean, that is what builds up the strength of a country, and our nation especially being a melting pot of out of many one, e pluribus unum. And it's division brings, divided we fall, but united we stand. Absolutely. And when we can be united in truth, we will flourish.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for being on the show today. I want to drive our listeners to your article, and we're going to post this on my page on America Out Loud, What If We've Been Wrong? You can find Cynthia's expose called True Feminism, Identifying the Real Threats to Women. I encourage every listener to download this, print it, get your highlighter. This thing, it's one of these reads that, okay, it's 21, 22 pages long. It's worth the investment to take the time, read it, devour it, so you can go out and you can share the truth with other people. It's time to dispel the lies. And that's why I called the show, What If We've Been Wrong? Shining light in dark places. We desire, and Cynthia desires as a candidate in District 6 in Virginia, for a culture of love, life, family. That's the kind of culture we want, but we can't have it if we're falling for too many of the lies of radical feminism. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to talking to you next time.